So, returning to something you pointed to earlier, there's a sort of macho, something's called broicism interpretation of just be tough it up, suck it up. I've heard you're at the Naval Academy, was it? And there's sort of I can imagine the Navy SEALs saying stuff like that, or someone like Jocko, who's a big influence. These sort of influencers who come from special forces of just suck it up. And it strikes me that there's, on the one hand, a good intention in that. People can be quite fragile today. Certainly, it can be a masculine quality to a certain degree of just get on with it. I've got Australian colleagues who are very good at that, for example. And, sometimes it's helpful, but it's not a particularly sophisticated approach to emotional self-management. And there is a risk, isn't there, within that of a simple like self-brutality and pushing things down from a psychoanalytic point of view doesn't always end well. So, yeah, would you like to say a little bit more about that? The
Well,
risk of an unsophisticated
I
approach.
worried hard about that because I advised, for decades, I've advised the military, and I was at the Naval Academy during pretty tense times and worked with SEALs and worked with people who really did um, think that they could just tough it out under any circumstances. And not just men, but women who really were oppressed by the situation or even by outside influences. They were discriminated against or refused promotions, or mocked, even when they graduate first in their class, for example, as one of my PhD students did at the Air Force Academy. And then went on to have these amazing careers with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But the idea that you just let it go and maybe even promote the kind of ideas that they sometimes heard in some of the songs about toughing it up got to them to the point of it being disruptive psychologically. And I think it's an unhealthy method. Part of the reason I wrote an earlier book called Stoic Warriors was I really saw the blessings and curses of Stoicism. It was far too clear to me from people returning from Vietnam at very, very high level ranks, from the current midshipmen or cadets, that they were hurting terribly under the idea
Mm.
that they couldn't talk at all about their feelings. The feelings were just ruled out from the beginning. And I never wanted to see that in a fighting force, where being at the top of your game really matters, but it also matters how you take care of your troops, how you let others know that you're not feeling well, and being able to acknowledge that you're not feeling well or that you need to talk it out with someone, even a chaplain who has anonymity, with whom you can keep your identity anonymous and it doesn't get reported. That was really, really important to me. So I wanted to make it
Mm.
absolutely clear. It was a time when creatine, I think, was still on the shelves in jars this big, huge. And then they got banned. This is a muscle building substance. And it was so obvious to me that I wanted something more than just toughness. If these, and some they were kids, 18 to 22-year-olds, or even 50-year-olds who had served in Vietnam, were going to make it through
Yeah.
through the next decade, especially leading troops who we were getting ready to go to wars.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, creatine's a fairly harmless muscle building supplement, but yeah, certainly in terms of sort of steroid use and things like that, people just toughing it out, not so smart. I mean, what I've loved about your work actually is the focus on the interpersonal aspect of resilience. So I sometimes say to the team in Ukraine, you're not resilient, you're inter-resilient. That
Mm.
we are relational creatures and the quality of our relationships is our resilience. And I wonder if that was almost a given in Greek culture, whereas we're in this much more hyper individualistic culture, where sort of the Stoic advice falls into the individualism of the modern West, and that relationality is perhaps lost.
I think that's really the case. I'll just go back for a second. So the Stoics come after Aristotle. Aristotle opens up the Nicomachean Ethics saying self-sufficiency isn't for us living alone. It's for us as a member of a family with brothers, sisters, spouses, fellow citizens. And it's relational. self, it sounds strange, but the very term to be in self-control, the Greek is self-control, is relational. And so that means your resilience, the endurance quality, depends on the sustaining support of others whom you trust and who you entrust in some ways with your care, and vice versa. They you. And it gets, and Aristotle is just keen on this. 2 out of 10 books in the Nicomachean Ethics are on friendship. That's really remarkable. They were kind of denied for a while because, or overlooked by British translators in some ways, and scholars, because they thought, where do I put this in a philosophy? But it's so clear that it's critical. The Stoics have that, but it gets diminished whether through our own lens, which, as you say, is hyper individualistic, or through the transmission. It's unclear, but the message often picked up is some things are within your control and some not. So you toughen up yourself to strengthen the areas of control. But Marcus Aurelius says at the beginning of meditations, but they're probably not in the order that he probably didn't write them in the order they are now given in books. He says, if you've ever seen an arm and a hand and a leg and a head separated from the trunk, he's got the battlefield in mind, I suspect. You know what it is then to cut yourself off from humanity. That's remarkable. So few people pick that up as a through line in Stoicism, but to me, it is the through line. That resilience is the sustaining and supporting um, and trusting of worthy others and worthy institutions in which you can invest your hope and your dreams. Um, Similarly, Seneca is always writing to a friend. He's not just writing to himself, he's writing to a friend, Lucilius, now, who's his junior. Now, whether or not was a real exchange in this epistolary relationship, we don't really know. But he's thinking about the other. And, this is sort of in his retirement days when he's been banished by Nero, and he's probably going to face his death very shortly. It's a forced suicide. But also, he doesn't die alone. He wants to do it like Socrates, but they're all surrounded by their friends in the last moments. It's not a solo act. And so I think and we know psychologically, resilience among children, adults and you work with so many folks in Ukraine, we know that it depends on others. You just can't do it on your own. And if that gets blotted out in the way we tell the story of Stoicism, we are just being so unfaithful to the texts. So I think that's just sort of critical, and it's been the kind of bugaboo of my writing, that when you say self-help, you sort of think about self as opposed to how am I situated in a partnership, in families, in business business ventures with others that I really like and can trust. And when do I bow out because they're undermining me?
Mm-hmm. Self-help as an idea is potentially narcissistic. As you say, it's historically inaccurate if we're really interested in Stoicism or Aristotle or any of these groups. And there is it's unhelpful in the sense that we're relational creatures, but it's also, there's a political implication there, isn't there? And that it says, hey, you've got to do this on your own. It's not about the structures or systems. It's not about the position you're in. It's simply up to you. So pull your socks up. The problem isn't you're in poverty or whatever it's a systemic issue. The problem is you're not thinking right. So sort that out. So, I mean, I'm kind of right leaning, but I see the truth in the kind of left position that there's real systemic structures that are really important for our resilience.